Welcome to Brainwaves and Breakthroughs.
Okay, have you ever just walked into a room and had that super strange feeling like, hold on, I've been here before,
Mm,
even when you know you haven't? Like it's like your brain is hitting like a rewind button or something on reality.
yeah.
Well, that's déjà vu, and that's exactly what we're diving into today. We've got a ton of research, and we'll even touch on some of the philosophical ideas about why this happens.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? It's one of those things that really makes you question, like, everything you thought you knew about your mind.
Right.
And even though there isn't, like, one clear answer,
Right.
there are a lot of really interesting theories that we can dig into.
Okay, so let's start unpacking this. So first up, we've got a whole bunch of theories that all kind of revolve around this idea of memory glitches.
Yeah.
What's the like main theme here?
So basically, these theories are saying that déjà vu happens when our brains kind of misfire,
Okay.
and it makes a new experience feel like it's an old memory. You can almost imagine your brain as like a filing system, you know? And every now and then it accidentally saves a new file in the wrong folder.
Oh, okay.
So you open it up and you're all of a sudden like surprised to find something that you thought you had seen before, but it's actually brand new.
So it's like our brains are like tricking us, making us think that we've like time traveled or something.
Exactly. And one
I-
of the most interesting theories about this is the memory encoding error theory. And that really focuses in on a specific part of the brain called the hippocampus.
Oh, okay.
That's like the brain's, I always say it's like the brain's chief librarian,
Okay.
you know, in charge of like organizing and storing all of our memories.
Right. So what happens if that librarian gets like a little disorganized, messes things up a little?
Well, so think about it this way. The hippocampus, it's constantly taking in new information
Okay.
and it's trying to make sense of everything, right?
Yeah.
But every now and then it can accidentally tag a new experience as an old memory.
Oh. And that leads to that really eerie, I've been here before feeling. It's almost like uh, that librarian accidentally shelved a brand new book in, like the classics section, right? You pick it up, you're like, wait, I've read this before, but you know you can't have.
Right, right. Okay, that makes sense. But what about those times when it's tied to a specific place?
Yeah.
You know, like you walk into a room
Mm-hmm.
and it feels like you've been there, even if you logically know you haven't. How do memory glitches explain that?
Well, that's where that familiarity-based recognition theory comes into play.
Okay.
And that theory basically suggests that certain things in a situation, like the layout of a room or the way things are arranged,
Oh, okay.
can trigger that sense of familiarity, even if the whole experience is totally new.
So it's not the entire like picture that's familiar, it's just little pieces that our brains like latching onto.
Yeah, think about it. Our brains are really good at recognizing patterns and making connections.
Right. That's how we learn, how we get around in the world. But sometimes those connections can get a little mixed up. Maybe the room that you're in has a similar layout to somewhere you saw in a movie, or maybe I don't know, the furniture reminds you of your grandma's house.
Oh.
Your brain picks up on those little things, those little similarities, and it misinterprets them as like, oh, I've been here before.
So it's like our brains are playing like a game of spot the difference with reality, and it's sometimes it gets a little carried away. It's like, oh, I see it.
Exactly. Now, another theory that kind of fits under that memory glitch umbrella is the dual processing theory.
Okay.
And this one gets a little more technical.
Right.
But essentially what this theory proposes is that our brains have two different paths for processing information.
Okay.
And sometimes there's like a little delay in one of those pathways.
So like a lag in the system.
Yes, exactly.
My internet does that all the time.
Exactly like that. And that lag, even if it's like a fraction of a second, it can totally mess with our perception of time.
Right.
So it makes a new experience feel like it's happening like twice.
Oh, okay.
And that leads to that déjà vu feeling.
Walk me through that. How would that play out in real life?
Okay, so let's say you're walking down the street and you see a dog out of the corner of your eye.
Yeah.
Like a split second later, you turn your head and you really see the dog.
Right.
That little tiny delay like between those two perceptions
Okay.
could be enough to trigger that I've seen this before feeling.
Why?
Your brain basically processed the same information twice. once through each pathway. And it interprets it as two separate events. So it's like our brains can make these little tiny time loops, and we don't even realize it.
Yeah.
Okay, that's both kind of creepy and kind of cool at the same time.
Right. Now, if we move away from the memory glitches a little bit.
Let's look into some explanations that are focused on the physical brain itself.
Okay, so now we're getting into the hardware.
Exactly.
The nuts and bolts of the brain.
Exactly, yeah. A lot of the neurological explanations for déjà vu actually focus on a region called the temporal lobe. It's basically like Grand Central Station for memory and sensory processing.
Oh, okay. So if there's something going on in the temporal lobe, it could be what's triggering déjà vu.
That's what a lot of researchers think, yeah. For example, did you know that people with temporal lobe epilepsy often experience déjà vu right before they have a seizure?
Wow. No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and it's thought that the abnormal electrical activity in their brain, like these mini seizures, can cause that weird feeling of familiarity.
Wow. So something as serious as a seizure could actually be behind this.
It could be in some cases. It's not just the electrical activity either. Researchers are also really interested in the role of neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin.
Right. Those are the chemical messengers in the brain, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
And they play a really big part in, regulating our mood, memory, and how we perceive things.
Okay.
And some scientists think that if those neurotransmitters are kind of out of whack, it could mess with our sense of familiarity leading to that déjà vu.
Right.
It's kind of like if your brain's communication system is a little jumbled up, the messages about what's new and what's old might get all mixed up.
So it's like our brains are sending like the wrong signals, making us feel like, wait, I've been here.
Exactly.
Even if we haven't. Man, this is making me question like everything I thought I knew about how my mind works.
Right. That's the fun of looking into these mysteries, right?
Yeah.
It forces us to really think about like the limits of how we see things and just how complex the brain is.
Yeah. And speaking of limitations, before we move on to some of the the more far out explanations,
right?
I want to talk about one more scientific theory that really shows how much our brains are like doing behind the scenes. The attentional slip theory.
Oh yeah, this one is really interesting. This basically says that déjà vu could happen when we experience something really briefly, like without even realizing it. And then later, when we fully experience that same situation, it makes us feel that familiarity even though we weren't really paying attention the first time.
Okay, I need an example. This one's a little hard to grasp.
Okay, so picture this. You're driving in your car, and you overhear a little bit of a conversation on the radio.
Okay.
But you're not really listening,
Right.
Later that day, you have a really similar conversation with a friend.
Right.
And boom, you get that feeling of déjà vu.
Huh.
Or imagine walking down a busy street, and you pass a bakery.
Right.
You get a whiff of fresh bread, but you don't really like register it at the time.
Right.
But then later when you walk into that bakery, you get that, wait, I've been here before.
So it's like our subconscious is like picking up on little clues that we're like consciously missing.
Exactly.
And then it uses them to play this weird trick on us later.
Exactly. It really shows how much of our perception and memory happens kind of under the surface, without us realizing it.
Yeah.
And sometimes those little subconscious things can pop up as déjà vu.
Like our brain's recording everything.
Yeah.
Even when we're not paying attention. That's kind of creepy when you think about it. But, okay, we've talked a lot about the science.
Yeah.
We've got memory glitches, brain structure, things, and even our attention span playing tricks on us. What about, like, the philosophical side of things? Are there any explanations that go beyond, like, pure science?
There are, and some of them get pretty wild. But before we jump into that, let's just take a minute to think about what we've learned so far.
Yeah, good idea. I need a minute to process all this brain stuff before we jump into the deep end of philosophy. So for everyone listening, we've just talked about a bunch of scientific theories about why déjà vu happens. From memory slip-ups to the brain just not quite working right. It seems like there are tons of explanations for this weird feeling.
Yeah.
But what if the answer is, like, beyond science?
Yeah.
What if it's a peek into something way more mysterious, something that we can't fully explain with science?
That's a question that's been around for, like, forever. It's a question that philosophers and people interested in spirituality have been thinking about for centuries.
Right.
And while we might not find like a definite answer,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
Looking at those philosophical interpretations can give us some really cool insights into what reality is and what it means to be human.
Okay, I'm ready to have my mind blown. Let's hear those philosophical theories.
All right, so some of those more mind-bending philosophical ideas. One of the most well-known and maybe the most interesting one is this whole idea of reincarnation.
Okay, yeah. Past lives. Now we're getting into it. This is where it gets really interesting.
Right. The idea is that déjà vu is like a glimpse into a past life, like a quick memory from a life you lived before.
Right.
You know, you're experiencing something that you've actually literally been through before, but in a different time, in a different body.
So that feeling of I've been here.
Yeah.
It's like a soul memory.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a really fascinating idea. And for a lot of people, it really clicks, you know?
Right.
Of course, if we're talking just science, there's no real proof for reincarnation. But it's still a really powerful idea to think about. Like, what if our consciousness, you know, what if it goes beyond just this one life?
Right.
Like, what if we're carrying around these echoes of our past selves?
Yeah, it definitely makes you think about things a little differently. It's like those little deja vu moments are like little cracks in what we think is real. Like they're hinting at something much bigger and more mysterious. So what other philosophical ideas are there?
Well, some people think that déjà vu is actually a form of precognition, like seeing into the future. It's
Right.
like a premonition, a quick flash of seeing something before it happens.
So it's not about the past. We're actually seeing a bit of the future.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Right. So in this view, that familiar feeling, it comes from already having seen the event, like in that precognitive flash. Like our consciousness is, for a second, out of sync with time, and we get a sneak peek of what's coming.
Wow. Okay, my mind is officially blown. So deja vu could be like a past life memory, or it could be a future vision.
Yeah.
I'm led to think we need a whole like separate deep dive just for the philosophy side of this.
Uh-huh. Yeah, you might be right. But there's one more philosophical explanation that I want to touch on.
Okay.
And it's a little more grounded in psychology. It's the idea of false memories.
Okay, so now our brains are like making things up.
Exactly. This theory says that déjà vu is basically just our brain creating false memories. Like it's a mind trick. You know, our brains are always trying to make stories, trying to make sense of the world.
Right. Right.
And sometimes those stories, they include memories that never actually happened.
So our brains are telling us a story.
Yeah.
Even if it's like not a true story.
In a way, yeah. False memories are really interesting. They can be super vivid and feel so real, even if they're totally made up.
Right.
And some philosophers think that déjà vu is just another example of how good our brains are at creating these fake experiences.
Wow. Okay, so we can't even trust our own memories. This is really making me question everything.
Yeah, that's what's so crazy about déjà vu. It makes us think about the limits of what we can perceive and how easily our memory can be tricked.
Right.
It reminds us that how we see reality, it's all filtered through our brains. And that filter, well, it's not always perfect.
Yeah, it's like deja vu is a glitch in the matrix.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a little reminder that things might not be exactly as we see them, you know.
I like that, yeah, that analogy. And it makes you think that even though science has learned a lot about the brain, there's still so much we don't get.
Right.
And déjà vu, it's the perfect example. It's this normal, everyday thing that still confuses scientists and philosophers.
Yeah. It's a good reminder that there's a ton we don't know about the human mind and what it can do. Speaking of things we don't know, what are some of the challenges for researchers who are like trying to study déjà vu?
Well, one of the biggest ones is that it's so random and unpredictable. We can't just make someone experience it in a lab, you know?
Oh, I can't just say, all right, everyone, have some déjà vu right now.
Exactly. I wish it were that easy, but it's not. But researchers are, they're trying to be creative. Some are using like questionnaires and surveys to gather data from people who've had déjà vu, hoping to see if there are like common patterns or things that trigger it.
So it's kind of like a crowdsourcing approach to understanding déjà vu.
Yeah, exactly. And they're also using brain imaging, like fMRI, to look at what's happening in the brain when people who have déjà vu a lot, when they're actually experiencing it.
So they're trying to catch those brain glitches in action.
Exactly. It's tricky, but they're making progress.
It sounds like a really interesting area of research. Are there any specific areas that you're like really excited about?
Definitely. One that I find really intriguing is the possible connection between déjà vu and creativity.
Oh, interesting. I hadn't thought about that before. What's the idea there?
Well, some researchers believe that people who experience déjà vu often might also be more likely to be, really creative.
Hmm.
So maybe those brain glitches are actually a sign of a really imaginative mind. That's the idea. They think that the same processes in the brain that cause those feelings of familiarity and déjà vu might also be involved in coming up with new ideas and making connections that are, kind of out there.
So maybe deja vu is like a little spark of inspiration from our subconscious,
Yeah.
like a sign that our brains are wired for creative thinking.
That's a possibility, yeah. Of course, they need to do more research to be sure,
Right.
but it's a cool thing to look into.
Yeah, I love that idea. Makes you wonder if there are like other hidden benefits to deja vu. Like maybe it's not just this weird thing that happens, but it's actually something that can like boost our brains, make us think better in some way.
It's a really interesting thought, right?
Yeah.
And it makes you think that maybe we shouldn't just ignore or be afraid of these unusual experiences. They might be trying to tell us something important about how our minds work, even if we don't fully get it yet.
Yeah, I love that. Instead of just being like, oh, that was weird, and
Yeah.
moving on, we should actually pay attention to those moments of deja vu and see like what we can learn from them. If
Yeah.
maybe our brains are trying to tell us something like go in a certain direction or see things in a new way.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe by studying déjà vu, we'll figure out even bigger mysteries about the human mind and what it can do.
Well, I'm definitely way more curious about deja vu now.
Yeah.
It's gone from this like creepy, unexplained thing to something that's actually pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
And maybe even, good for us.
That's the cool thing about science, right? The more we learn about something, the less scary it gets.
Right.
And a lot of times we find these hidden, like, amazing things that we never would have even thought of.
Well said. I think we've covered a lot today, from all those science theories to the philosophy stuff, and we even talked about that potential link between deja vu and creativity. But before we finish up, I want to bring it back to our listeners.
Yeah, good idea. What are some things they can do to explore their own experiences with déjà vu?
Exactly. So for everyone listening, here's a little challenge for you. Next time you have that deja vu feeling, really pay attention. What sticks out to you? What are you feeling? Think back to those theories we talked about. Could any of them explain what you're going through?
That's a great idea. It might also be helpful to, like, keep a journal of your déjà vu experiences.
Oh, yeah.
Write down the date, time, where you were, and anything else you remember. You might start to see patterns or things that trigger it for you.
Yeah, and if you're feeling really adventurous, you could even try to, like, make yourself have deja vu in a safe way, of course.
Mhm.
I've heard about things like listening to binaural beats or using those sensory deprivation tanks, which are supposed to, like, change your state of mind and maybe make you more likely to have deja vu.
Yeah, just be sure to do your research and be careful, While déjà vu itself isn't usually harmful, it's always better to be safe than sorry when you're, messing with your state of mind.
Good point. Safety first, always. But I think the main thing to remember here is that deja vu is something we can all learn from. It's like it shows us that our brains are always working in ways that we don't totally understand.
Yeah.
And by paying attention to those weird moments, we might discover some of the secrets of our own minds.
That's a great way to put it. It's like an invitation to embrace the mystery,
Yeah.
to keep asking questions. After all, the more we learn about ourselves, the more we can, like, appreciate just how amazing and complex being human is.
Well said. I think that's the perfect way to wrap things up. So until next time, keep your eyes peeled for those weird familiar moments. You never know, your brain might be trying to tell you something really interesting.
And remember, even though it can feel a little spooky, déjà vu is usually nothing to be scared of. It's just another one of those cool quirks of our brains.
Exactly. It's a reminder that reality, it's a lot more flexible and personal than we might think. And who knows, maybe those glitches, maybe they're actually like doorways to a whole new level of understanding.
Well, on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into déjà vu. Thanks for joining us on this mind-bending trip. We hope you learned something new and maybe even had some aha moments along the way. And if you've had any interesting experiences with déjà vu, we'd love to hear about them.
So until next time, keep exploring those mysteries of your own mind. And remember that already seen feeling, it could be like a glimpse into something really amazing.
Yeah. And hey, maybe it's like a reminder to just slow down a bit, appreciate the moment, and really appreciate those strange and wonderful ways our brains try to make sense of the world.
I like that. It's like a nudge to pay attention to those little clues, those hidden patterns that are like all around us.
Exactly. And to remember that reality, well, it's a lot more, complex and layered than we usually realize.
Well, on that note, I think it's time for us to break out of this time loop and wrap up our deep dive into deja vu.
Yeah. It's been a really interesting journey, hasn't it?
It has.
From those memory glitches to even thinking about past lives, we've covered a lot.
We have, yeah. And I think what I'm taking away from this is that even with all the progress science is making, there's still so much we don't know about deja vu.
Totally. And that's what makes it so fascinating, right? It reminds us that there's a lot about the human mind that we haven't figured out yet.
Yeah, it's kind of humbling, isn't it? That this everyday experience, something that most of us have felt, can still like puzzle the smartest scientists and philosophers.
It is. But it also reminds us just how powerful and full of potential the human brain is. Who knows what other secrets we'll uncover as we keep exploring how our minds work?
Well, I, for one, am really excited to see what the future holds. And until then, I'll definitely be paying more attention to those deja vu moments, wondering if they're trying to tell me something.
I think that's a great way to be. Embrace the mystery. Stay curious.
Yeah.
Keep exploring those thoughts. You never know what amazing things you'll discover.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us on this mind-bending adventure. And until next time, keep those brains buzzing.